Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more turkey patterning, and today we've got another really interesting combination that some of you guys requested to see, and I kind of wanted to test it as well to see what would happen because it's definitely an old school, very basic type of setup with a much more modern load that really has been a great performer. So can this combination actually work for us? I don't know. It's definitely going to be pretty interesting to see what happens. But as for the show we've got out here today, I brought out some more of the Herter's 12 gauge TSS turkey loads. They are a 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 1.5 ounce payload of number 9 TSS shot, moving about 1200 feet per second. And if you've been around the channel for any length of time, you know that these are some really impressive performers for an off the shelf TSS shell that is quite a bit cheaper than some of the rest of them out there as well. But how can they do through today's setup? That's going to be the big question. And as for the setup we've got out here today, you guys wanted to see those Herter shells run through this guy. This is my old Mossberg 500A, but it has a 30-inch fixed full choke barrel on it. And I did measure the actual constriction down here, and it comes out to be right at a 695 constriction. So very typical full choke type of range here, but much more open than a lot of your turkey chokes are, that's for sure. Now granted, those Herter shells don't really seem to care a whole lot about constriction. They've done well in pretty well everything we've put them through. So what can they do through a fixed full choke, old style barrel like this? I don't know. It's definitely going to be pretty interesting to see what happens. Now, as for running a TSS shell through an old fixed full choke barrel like that, I'm not really too concerned about it for testing purposes and the occasional turkey hunt or something like that. You'll be just fine and not tear anything up. I don't think I'd feed a steady diet of them through there, but for testing purposes and the occasional turkey round or two, that's fine. So I'm definitely not too worried about this setup today. But as for the test, everything is going to be the same as usual. I'm not handicapping this old setup at all. It's going to be the same 40-yard pattern that we always do. I also have the chronograph so we can get our velocity out of this big 30-inch barrel. So let's get you guys to view this target and take the shot and see just what kind of a pattern we're able to get out of these Herter shells through this old fixed full choke Mossberg. Sometimes the old stuff is really disappointing, but sometimes these old fixed choke, really long barrels can give us some really impressive results. So let's head over here and take the shot and see what kind of a pattern it gives us. Okay, so that shell gave us 1262 through the chrono. The boss claim is 1200, but we typically do see mid 1200s out of these shells anyway, through pretty much whatever setup we put them through. So I don't think that 30-inch barrel had too much of an effect on them compared to what we normally see. So our velocity looks very much normal for these shells up here. But what kind of a pattern did we actually get down there 40 yards? Let's go check it out and see what it gave us. All right, now we're down here at our 40-yard paper, and this is what we got. And this is a very solid pattern right here. I'll get up closer so you guys can see a little bit better on the spread here, but it's a pretty nice and uniform, even pattern. We were a touch off to the right, but we still do have a dead bird. There is one through the back edge of the brain and a couple more down the spine. And obviously, it would have looked a little better if we had centered it up just a little bit. That was probably more so me than it was the actual shotgun and stuff pulling it to the right. Either way, that's why we use the backers, so we can see this kind of stuff, because this is a very solid pattern. It's definitely nowhere near as tight as what we typically see out of these Herter shells, but it is a fixed full choke barrel that's about 695 constriction. So realistically speaking, that is a beautiful pattern for what this setup actually is. We do have a little bit of tightening in the core area just off the right edge of that turkey paper, I'd say, but still it's very uniform all the way around the edges there. And as for the outer edges up here, we have maybe a couple little flyers around the edge, maybe that one down there at the bottom left and one or two down there at the very bottom, but still not bad whatsoever. Even though it is a little bit more open than what we typically see out of these Herter shells, that is easily a 40-yard pattern that you could push out to that 50-yard range and still be confident in it. So really, there's not a whole lot wrong with that. It gives you a nice amount of leeway either way. As you can see, we were definitely off to the right, but we still had plenty of pellets over there to get get that turkey with. So overall here, I'm definitely not too disappointed. Being that old school and basic of a setup could have really just gave us a very poor looking pattern. We've seen those old setups be extremely disappointing before, but this combination clearly is good enough to get the job done. And that just goes to show how good those Herter shells actually are. That they really just don't care what setup or choke combo you put them through. They're going to give you a plenty good enough of a turkey pattern. And believe it or not, the pattern we're looking at right here is probably the worst pattern we've gotten out of those through anything we've run them through. And that's saying something, because that is a solid turkey pattern. So even though this is a pretty basic old school setup, it's getting a thumbs up from me on this one. I would not be scared in the slightest to hunt with that kind of a pattern or setup combo, that's for sure. Okay, here's the wad out of that shell, and I actually did find the little gas seal piece that sits on the bottom this time. So that is how it's loaded in the shell, something like that. And clearly, although it's a pretty basic overall design, it works for these shells, that's for sure. As for the wad itself, very typical Herter stuff. It is essentially the same cut and shape and stuff as the Longbird XR wads, because Herter's is just Winchester rebranded for Cabela's and Bass Pro. But it is a little bit thicker and a little stiffer with the styrofoam piece down there. And this is the first time we've ever had a single pellet stuck down in one of these Herter's wads. And I think that more so just came from getting stuck in the little styrofoam piece more so than anything else. So typically, I don't like to see stuff stuck down in wads like this, but for what kind of a pattern we saw and for how good these shells are, 1 in probably 25 or 30 Herter shells we've tested now is just fine. But very normal looking wad, definitely nothing too special to see, and I think it did exactly what it was supposed to do for us today. All right, y'all. Well, what did you think about that pattern right there? Definitely a very solid, very usable turkey pattern all day long. I would not be scared in the slightest to hunt with that if that's the setup that I had to use. And even though I do have other very good performing turkey setups, I definitely wouldn't be opposed to grabbing that combination out of the safe either to take out, or kind of an old school run and gun type of hunt or something like that. That's absolutely a usable combination. So let me know your thoughts about it down in the comments. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Do you have an old school setup like this and have tested these TSS shells or the Herter shells or anything through it? What kind of results have you seen? And is that a combination that you would hunt with? Let me know all that down below, as well as maybe what other shells might you want to see through that old Mossberg 500 there, because clearly it can still get the job done just fine for turkeys as well if you find the right shell. So is there some other stuff you guys want to see? Let me know all that. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description below if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.